Borchard. We like to celebrate a rather bad habit. If you are American or if you're British, you start sessions like this with a very clever, very deep anecdote with a quote. But if you're a German, you stick to the habit of the preliminary remark before you actually get to the point. And I'd stick to that. So first of all, a very warm thank you, dear Professor Stauber, for inviting me to chair the first session of today. I'm very much enjoying this conference. Please accept my gratitude. My second preliminary remark, unlike Dina Porat, who everyone here knows, I fear I cannot count on that. So I will start by briefly introducing myself. My name is Michael Borchard. I'm the head of the scientific department, services department, and the Archive for Christian Democratic Politics at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, a German political foundation. And the archive is actually the archive of the CDU, which also contains important documents on our topic, such as large parts of the holdings of Franz Böhm and Otto Küster, for instance. Before taking on this position, however, I had previously headed the Adenauer Foundation's office in Israel for almost 4 years. And in that capacity, also had a very close cooperation with the Tel Aviv University, so it's a little bit like coming home. It was there during the time I had here where I had the idea of writing a book about the very special relationship, and I dare to call it a friendship between Konrad Adenauer and David Ben-Gurion, in which, of course, the Luxembourg Agreement also plays an important role. The book will be available in English soon, if you forgive me that little advertisement break. The third preliminary remark, and then it is enough, about the Germans, the cliché exists that we are in love with punctuality. Even though you only have to use Deutsche Bahn once in Germany today to immediately lose this illusion, I still want to fulfill the cliché, more or less 100% today, and will be relatively strict about keeping to the times during the presentations. I'm sorry, Kai. I will give a small sign in each case shortly before the end, my dear speakers, so you have to take it. Every chair is always tempted to think that his or her own panel is by far the most important panel of the whole conference. I resist this temptation, not at least after the experience of yesterday's excellent panel, but I cannot resist the remark that a conference that gathers under the title 70 years of Holocaust compensation and restitution would have actually missed the point if it did not also deal with the negotiations as such, with the agreement itself, but also with its implementation. And that is actually what we want to do now, as you know. Yesterday, not least during the screening of the wonderful film, the name of Fritz Schäffer was mentioned again and again. The name of the man who was Adenauer's most prominent opponent in Germany, along with actually Franz Josef Strauss, who became, and that's quite surprising, one of Adenauer's most important accomplices in establishing what is important until today, the military cooperation between Israel and Germany, only a few years later. The fact that in recent decades, the Federal Ministry of Finance has moved away from being a doubter to becoming a frontrunner in matters of reparations, and I have to tell you that Kai did not bribe me for this statement, by the way, is perhaps also a kind of reparation in itself, reparations for the opposition that came to the fore in the person of Schäffer. The theme portal, Wiedergutmachung, is an expression of this fact. It may be a valuable source for research and scholarship, the importance of which Dani Dayan has pointed out, but I think it is far more. By making the individual case files accessible, not least to the families of survivors, they offer the chance to retrace one's own family identity. And that, I think, is also very important. We have all dedicated ourselves to scientific work, but it is always also about individual fates of people. Research has done a lot in this field, and this conference expresses that very clearly in all its facets. But in the end, as yesterday's film screening shows, it is also about communicating knowledge. There is no doubt that this portal is doing that. Wambach, the in-house historian of the Federal Ministry of Finance, will now explain this portal and its potential to us. I will not go into all the details of his life again. That's what the CVs in the conference folders are actually for. But I can reveal a little well-kept secret. He once worked for my employer, the Adenauer Foundation, actually in the department that I'm now heading. Before I came to the department, I have to tell. So in contrary to me, he is now really important. Kai, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Borchard, for this introduction, and good morning to everybody. I fear I have to speed up now a little bit because I thought I could. Yeah, that's a cliche too. So, well, I'll give you the overview. Maybe that's better. So, first of all, time's running now. So, no. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure and a special honor to be able to speak here today as a representative of the German Federal Ministry of Finance. Professor Stauber, I would like to take this opportunity to officially thank you once again for your interest and your willingness to include our presentation of the online platform, the theme portal, in this morning's program. Many of you may be wondering what the Finance Ministry is doing here at this academic conference among all these researchers, most of them historians, not as passive listeners, but as active participants, with a speech, a lecture, a presentation. What is there to present? And don't worry, I'm not here to talk about taxation. I will strictly adhere to the topic of the conference. 70 years of Holocaust compensation and restitution. 70 years of the Luxembourg Agreement, 70 years after a watershed moment in compensation law. But it also means, and I'll say this outright, 70 years of efforts to accomplish something that ultimately can never be achieved. Wiedergutmachung, as the concept and word is used in Germany, is not possible. Not in a literal sense, not as an end in itself. And yet I stand before you here today at this large international conference, admittedly also as a historian, but above all as a representative of the German Federal Ministry of Finance, which has been responsible for this very matter since the early 1950s. Wiedergutmachung, making amends for national socialist injustice. We already heard some outstanding presentations on this topic yesterday, and Professor Gaschler gave a keynote speech that, in my view, was a very successful attempt to bridge the gap between the present and the future. And this is where I come in with my topic, future tasks of Wiedergutmachung. Indeed, I'm here today not so much to look back to the past, but to the future. I'm here to show how we, in the future and for the future, intend to facilitate and enhance the all-important act of gazing back in time. We as the German federal government are also very interested to see what is new in and from the field of research on compensation, restitution and Wiedergutmachung. Moreover, we are confident we have something to contribute to this field, and that the future work of the Finance Ministry will assist and support ongoing research. At the same time, we hope to receive assistance and support from the research community, from you in this endeavor. And what is this endeavor? It includes what I intend to present to you here today, the online platform, the theme portal for Wiedergutmachung, as a digital portal to all files, documents and records of relevance to compensation and restitution. First, let me say that it will take many, many years, decades actually, until truly everything is available. I myself, as I've heard, only have some minutes, which means that I will now first quickly return to the question of what I'm doing here and why the Finance Ministry is creating this online platform. Second, outline what has already been achieved and is being achieved on this very long road. And finally, third, touch on the challenges, but also the visions of the many opportunities that the online platform holds for the future. Now to the question, why are we doing all of this? 70 years ago, this landmark agreement was signed in Luxembourg. It was a turning point for everyone involved, for Germany, for Israel, and for the Claims Conference. A turning point in terms of its substance and symbolism, and in terms of its consequences. This was, perhaps to the surprise of some, not a one-off event, not a conclusion, not the end, but rather the beginning of a project, some kind of project, that would span many decades. But 70 years since 1952 also means that it has now been 7 decades, or simply put, a very long time. What does this mean for the future? The numbers of survivors, as we've heard yesterday, the numbers of survivors are unfortunately declining dramatically. It is regrettably foreseeable that soon, too soon, there will no longer be any witnesses among us. Does this mean, strictly speaking, the end of the Wiedergutmachung process? Since it will no longer be possible to provide material benefits? Would that mark the end of Wiedergutmachung? Should we then, at that point in time, ask the question, have we now made amends? Have we mended? What can be mended? That is, of course, impossible. Since nothing can truly be mended, the Wiedergutmachung process, this unattainable attempt which has been underway for 70 years, cannot end. It will have to evolve, to transform into something else. And it will have to adapt to future challenges. After all, there are more than just material aspects to Wiedergutmachung. These material aspects may one day come to an end, but there is no end to our moral responsibility. Even before the Luxembourg Agreement, Konrad Adenauer spoke of both the material and the moral amends that would have to be made. He called it a moral obligation and an honorable duty of the German people to do its utmost to achieve this. Nahum Goldmann also saw the agreement and the arrangements concluded in Luxembourg as an admittedly non-conclusive moral act of Wiedergutmachung. And that is precisely how it is addressed, namely in a non-conclusive manner. And this transformation has already begun. Already several years ago, the Finance Ministry was asking itself, what could be the future of Wiedergutmachung? What does this transformation entail? Clearly, each new generation will have to grapple with this issue anew and determine what approach it will ultimately take. We cannot decide this today, but we can and we must pave the way forward. Part of this will involve Holocaust education, with many partners around the world, including, for example, the Claims Conference. Of key importance for the future, however, and for the ongoing process of redefining what form it will take, and for successive generations, will be the knowledge concerning what was accomplished over the decades. What impacts did it have? What horrific events preceded it? Who was affected by it? Who, for what reasons, did or did not do what to whom? And this, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the files on compensation, on restitution, Schilomin, Wiedergutmachung, and so on. And I mean to all of them. After all, to this day, these files on Wiedergutmachung from Finance Ministry, from the Chancellery, from the Foreign Office, and from other institutions still exist. These records include key information on the historical background, on legislation, and on the development and implementation of programs and measures. And these records reveal the ongoing, ever-evolving, and increasingly professional approaches, that is, the generally improving initiatives, the macro-social, the political, the administrative, and the legal aspects of compensation, restitution, Wiedergutmachung. Thus, the records ultimately help to illuminate the complete history of the evolution of Wiedergutmachung for National Socialist Injustice, right up to the present. We have kilometer upon kilometer of file material here that documents and demonstrates this process. How and when was this dealt with? What was done? How was it done? Who, where, good, bad, sometimes this way, sometimes that way. It's no secret that it was complicated. It was an evolutionary story that evolved with the changes in these 70 years in politics. As Ben Ferenc said in the film yesterday, the survivors felt they did not get enough, and they were right. As a sum, it was quite something. And the story continues, still trying to fill gaps and achieve improvements for the survivors. So these ministerial records are still growing. But there's more, and there are more important aspects. After the Luxembourg Agreement was signed, options were created for individual compensation. Applications could be submitted, and they were submitted. Hundreds of thousands, millions of them, as you will know. And we estimate, we aren't yet exactly sure, that there are over 100 kilometers of file material on this and counting. Germany's compensation policy was never a grand design, fully planned right from the outset, from top to bottom, from left to right, and perfect in every respect. On the contrary, Germany's compensation policy consists of a long succession of diverse legal and extra-legal measures. The policy spanned several decades and was generally oriented within the scope of a compromise that was politically and, yes, socially expedient to improve upon and adjust. It also sought to fill the gaps and, whenever possible, to compensate for them. A few years ago, we compiled an initial overview of the various measures. So this year reflects the situation in 2018. Don't strain your eyes. You wouldn't recognize much, even if the quality was sharp. It's just to give you a general impression. The 1952 Luxembourg Agreement is here. The Federal Compensation Act, or BEG, is here on the overview. And the so-called Article 2 agreement with the Claims Conference is here. In addition, there are countless other measures that are also part of the overall picture. Global agreements, hardship funds, ghetto pensions and compensation, policies enacted by the individual West German states, regulations that date back to the Allied occupation of Germany, the vast field of restitution, etc. So each of these regulations has generated file material. Sometimes a lot, like the Federal Compensation Act and restitution measures, sometimes a comparatively smaller amount. Luxembourg marked the beginning and served as the catalyst for most of them. Above all, it allowed for individual compensation, for individual applications to be submitted after that. And it wasn't easy. In fact, it was very difficult for many to do so. In many cases, the decision to submit an application or not raised major questions of conscience. Should they venture to deal with German bureaucracy? That wasn't easy. And to be honest, in many cases, it wasn't made easy either, because innumerable details had to be supplied. Surname, first name, maiden name, date of birth, place of residence, before, during, and after the persecution. Education, training, and studies, so profession. Family members with, in some cases, the same details required there. Information on personal assets and income. Experiences of persecution, from when to when, where, by whom, etc., etc. What was in detail stolen? That's all in the files. How can this be substantiated and proven? This was often a traumatic experience that brought back traumatic memories. There can be no doubt about that. And then, often enough, applicants encountered a barrage of bureaucratic red tape. Then came the questions and the doubts. Then more documents had to be produced, more evidence, more proof, more documentation, more experts' assessments, and then there was the endless ream of correspondence. And in some cases, in too many cases, it all ended in court, and so on and so forth. At this point, though, I have an observation to add, not only from an administrative point of view, but also as an historian specializing in the history of Germany's restitution policies. This information and these, in some cases, highly bureaucratic procedures were, of course, also necessary and important in order to be able to implement something like this in the first place. It didn't simply happen at the flick of a switch. It had to be manageable. There had to be processes in place so that staff and case workers could take decisions. You needed, of course, bureaucracy. Undeniably, in many cases, it could have been done better and should have been done better. You can say that about a lot of things in retrospect. But on the whole, bureaucracy is hard to avoid. In many cases, though, it clearly failed to make the grade. Most important, all these applications, with all these details and everything associated with it, these records still exist today. Of course, and you are all already conducting research with them, or hopefully planning to do so. After all, from today's perspective, these documents contain a wealth of information, not only for you as researchers, but of course also for the relatives and descendants of the survivors, who in many cases did not talk about being persecuted, could not speak about it. And this information can be very important, especially for the third, fourth, and fifth generations after the survivors. There were many different regulations, many different application options, many different application procedures, massive quantities of applications, and as a result today, files and documents, extending for over 100 kilometers. Ultimately, these files all belong together, subject matter-wise, content-wise, not historically, but as a means to historize them in context. And they belong together from an ethical perspective, in my opinion, as well. But, here comes the problem, these documents, as you know, are unfortunately not all neatly arranged next to each other at a central location, with easy access to the necessary infrastructure, with rail and motorway connections and an airport right around the corner. No, instead, they are located all over the place and widely dispersed. In Germany alone, I cited this example earlier, the Federal Compensation Act, or BEG. This is federal law. Now, of course, one could, should, and would think that the documents are all stored in Koblenz, in the federal archives. But the BEG is a federal law that is executed independently by the individual German states. In other words, the documents are located in the former West German states and their respective archives. Now, for the sake of simplicity, I've listed only one archive per state. Of course, in some cases, there are more. In Baden-Württemberg alone, we have 4 sites with these documents. So those are the BEG documents. In the former East Germany, we don't have any BEG documents, but we do have files that are part of the whole complex. Also at the municipal level, but that wouldn't fit on the figure here. I mentioned global agreements earlier. In the 1950s and 1960s alone, 12 agreements were concluded with Western European countries. Then in the 1990s, more with Eastern European countries. And I spell you a world map here, we would mainly see Israel, for example, and the Claims Conference in New York, among others. So all of these files are widely dispersed instead of being in one place. But even if there was such a place, an archive where you could all go and search through the entire body of documents at your leisure, it would still not reach as many people as we hope to reach. Such an archive would probably reach only you, the top-ranking researchers in this field, and a handful of others. But we want to reach as many people as possible, or rather they should have access to the files, especially the relatives and descendants of those persecuted in Germany, in Israel, in Europe, in the US, all over the world, who are often able to find information about their own family and identity histories in these documents that they otherwise would never have been able to obtain. Ensuring that they are better able to do this is also one of the successor objectives of Wiedergutmachung, so future tasks. The path that leads us there also takes us to the future because it is digital in nature. Nothing else will do. It must be international, it must be digital, it must be adaptable, it must be connected to networks, and it will be all of these things. I mentioned this at the outset. We've been thinking about this for a number of years. At a very early stage in our reflections, we approached Yad Vashem here in Israel and other institutions with our idea because we realized that we couldn't do this alone and that we didn't want to do it alone either. And I have to say this at this juncture because we are positively overwhelmed by this, the openness, the curiosity, the helpfulness and the kindness that Yad Vashem has shown us in connection with this project. Time and again, it's hard to find words to express my gratitude for this. Just last week, we and our partners of the online platform attended a joint workshop hosted by our colleagues in Jerusalem, and such ongoing exchanges also with other partners are important, and they are important to us. And this outstanding collaboration with everyone has already borne fruit. On June 1st, our State Secretary, Louise Hölscher, concluded an important agreement with the archives in Germany at the Petersburg Hotel near Bonn. This agreement will now expedite the development of the online platform. Referring to the event, our minister, Christian Lindner, emphasized, and I quote, "With every survivor who passes away, our responsibility grows. We intend to preserve the past for the future and render it visible. The policy of Wiedergutmachung and compensation pursued by Germany has resulted in a unique legacy of documents. The contents of these files and documents are to be brought together centrally and made digitally accessible for the future." End of quote. And that is precisely what we are doing. Although still in a very rudimentary form, the online platform was launched on June 1st. This means that I come before you today with a little bit more than just warm words for you and the vague and distant promise of a bright future. No, it's real. We have started, we are getting started now, and we will continually work to breathe life into this online platform for you. And I mean that in a literal sense, for as we were told by Yad Vashem, with regard to the applicant's documents, these are testimonies. These are accounts and statements and depositions by survivors about their ordeals and about their lives. As you can all imagine, this is an undertaking that will require a great deal of time and effort. There's a vast amount of material in very many different places, in many very different countries, in archives and in other places, and it will take years and decades to accomplish. We cannot do it in all in one go. But time and technology are on our side in the sense that we know that in the years to come, the range of available technical solutions will get better and better. Nevertheless, we still clearly face the most daunting of challenges. We will have to meet individually with all archives and institutions. We will have to agree on common standards. We will have to reach a consensus on the objective. The online platform will have to develop and grow, both in terms of its capabilities and content. It is important for us here to engage in an ongoing dialogue that takes all perspectives on board, a dialogue that also includes you, in particular, the academic community. You are our clients and consultants all rolled into one. Formats for this already exist, or if necessary, we will develop them. I mentioned our hope of technological support. Even with state-of-the-art technology, this will be a challenge. I have to rush a little bit. Compensation, Wiedergutmachung, no problem. Restitution was, as mentioned earlier, not a grand design with standardized processes. Likewise, there are no standardized application forms or templates, nor have they all been filled out in the same manner. nor in the same language. German, Hebrew, English, different scripts, Latin script, Ivrit, Cyrillic. Here's but one example, just to give you an idea of the challenges involved. Just look at these 2 sheets of paper from a single application. It's a completely heterogeneous layout everywhere. So we have different fonts, typewriter fonts, various handwriting styles, and highly popular, not only in Germany, but we tend to like it, official stamps. Some documents are damaged. And there are also difficulties like backgrounds that bleed through when paper is translucent. So using technology is also a challenge, but efforts are currently underway to train AI to conduct independent analysis of these documents. I'm going to rush this through just to say this will help. The efforts of our partners are very promising, but it is, as you can imagine, it is complicated. To train AI to read and conduct and process information independently from this very heterogeneous files, and it is a very complex thing to do. I told Professor Harald Sack, who's working on this for us with his team, that when I look at these images, I don't understand every single detail. And fortunately, I don't have to. Because I also don't understand the diagram of an electric motor either. I'm just glad when the thing works and I know how to drive a car. And the same analogy applies to this situation. And it applies to how you will work with the platform. It's just to give you an impression why it will take some time to deal with this mass of material, even if AI will help. So last but not least, and this must be emphasized, questions of access and security play a big role. The files will be extensively cataloged and indexed, far beyond the usual archival standards. And we intend to digitize them to a very, very large extent. But it is clear that the data and information generated here come from highly sensitive sources. Although this is less true of our ministry files and all the files from the state sources, these will be made available quickly, or should we say more quickly. But we have an obligation to treat the application files with the utmost sensitivity and care. Nothing will simply be posted online. The goal is to create a virtual reading room with different levels of authorization, depending on the requirements and specific nature of the files. So nothing to worry about. And nothing to worry about in the other direction either. We basically want visibility and access. And we can't do that if we catalog and digitize everything and then lock it all away in a digital form. So, coming to an end, slowly. The theme portal will require the development of a complex but ultimately very worthwhile rights management system. In summary, the more we can rely on the help of AI, the better. This will hopefully also allow the wide range of data generated from these extensively indexed and cataloged files to be made available to you and to the field of research without violating personal and other rights. If everything is networked and if everything is searchable, this can be done, for instance, via statistical evaluations, via comparison options, via combined meta searches across diverse inventories, etc. And finally, and this is also being worked on, we want to develop this online platform not only as a point of access to the files, but as a portal, as a place for exchanges and debates, and also for you, for the research community. In this sense, this is hopefully the beginning of a new interactive relationship with all of you that we look forward to. It's a colossal undertaking that will take years and decades to complete and must take a very long time because of the very special nature of the material in question. The long-term process alluded to here is at the same time an expression of the German government's long-term commitment to the ongoing responsibilities of Wiedergutmachung. In these times, it also might be the right thing to do, to make the process as transparent as it can be. I mean, in terms of a transitional justice. In the end, we might contribute with a very highly documented undertaking that shows what consequences in detail and long-term a war and crimes against humanity can have. Last page. Therefore, we are striving for a comprehensive access to this legacy of documents on restitution and compensation with all the necessary security protections, with all the desired openness, with all possible possibilities for posterity and future generations, for the descendants of the survivors, and for scholastic and political education, and for you, for research, for academia worldwide. And finally, for the transparent documentation on the fact that Wiedergutmachung has always been and must always remain, that is to say, an attempt. And that is precisely for this reason, all the more important it is to continue to make this attempt, to shape it, to fill it with life, and to never give up. So we will keep on trying. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this impressive presentation. Thank you also for applying the wonderful Israeli notion of Tacheles to the bureaucracy and all the involved issues. Also, thank you for introducing us to the complexity of this endeavor that you are doing here. But I think thank you and to your colleagues for the service that the Ministry of Finance provides here, because I personally think that is very helpful and very important.